The morning sun cast a golden glow across Kensington Palace as Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood before her bedroom mirror, adjusting the delicate pearl necklace that had once belonged to Princess Diana. Today was supposed to be a day of celebration, a momentous occasion that would mark a new chapter in the royal family's history. The Commonwealth Gala was set to be the most spectacular event of the year, bringing together world leaders, celebrities, and philanthropists to celebrate unity and hope for the future. Catherine's hands trembled slightly as she fastened the clasp. She had been looking forward to this evening for months, carefully planning every detail with her team. The gala represented everything she believed in, bringing people together, supporting charitable causes, and using their platform to make a real difference in the world. Her emerald green gown, custom designed by her favorite British designer, hung perfectly on her frame, and her hair was styled in an elegant updo that complemented the vintage jewelry. William entered the room, adjusting his white bow tie with practiced ease. Even after all these years of marriage, Catherine's breath still caught when she saw him in formal attire. He looked every inch the future king he was destined to become, tall, dignified, and carrying himself with the quiet confidence that had drawn her to him during their university days at St. Andrews. "You look absolutely radiant," William said softly, approaching his wife and placing gentle hands on her shoulders. "Are you ready for tonight?" Catherine nodded, though something in her eyes suggested a hint of nervousness. "I've been thinking about the speech we're giving together. It feels like such an important moment to address everything that's been happening in the world lately. People need hope right now." The couple had spent weeks crafting their joint address, which would focus on resilience, community support, and the importance of coming together during challenging times. Recent global events had left many feeling uncertain about the future, and William and Catherine wanted to use their platform to inspire and encourage their audience. As they made their final preparations, their three children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, burst into the room with their nanny, Maria. The children had been excited about seeing their parents in their formal attire, and their faces lit up with wonder at the sight of Catherine in her stunning gown. "Mummy, you look like a real princess," Charlotte exclaimed, clapping her hands together in delight. "She is a real princess, silly," George corrected his sister with the authority of an older brother, though his own eyes were wide with admiration. Louis, the youngest, simply ran to his mother and wrapped his small arms around her legs, careful not to wrinkle her dress. Catherine knelt down to his level, her heart swelling with love for her children. These quiet family moments were precious to her, especially on busy days filled with royal obligations. "Be good for Maria tonight," William told the children, ruffling George's carefully combed hair. "We'll tell you all about the gala tomorrow morning." The drive to the venue took them through the heart of London, past crowds of well-wishers who had gathered along the route. Catherine waved from the car window, her practiced smile warm and genuine. She never tired of connecting with people, even in these brief moments of contact. The public's affection for the royal couple had grown steadily over the years, particularly as they had shown themselves to be devoted parents and dedicated to their charitable work. The Royal Albert Hall had been transformed for the evening into a glittering wonderland. Thousands of lights twinkled from the ceiling, creating the effect of dining under the stars. Tables were adorned with white roses and gold accents, and a string quartet played softly in the background as guests began to arrive. The guest list read like a who's who of international society: prime ministers, ambassadors, Nobel Prize winners, Oscar-winning actors, and business leaders who had pledged significant donations to various charitable causes. As William and Catherine's car pulled up to the red carpet, the flash of cameras was almost blinding. Photographers and journalists from around the world had gathered to capture every moment of their arrival. The couple paused for photos, Catherine's hand resting lightly on William's arm as they smiled for the cameras. She had learned over the years to find a focal point beyond the crowd of photographers, which helped her maintain her composure and natural expression. Inside the venue, They were greeted by the evening's organizers and began the traditional receiving line, where they would meet and greet each of the evening's honored guests. Catherine excelled at these interactions, remembering personal details about people she had met before and asking thoughtful questions about their work and families. Her genuine interest in others had always been one of her greatest strengths as a member of the royal family. During the cocktail hour, they mingled with guests from various backgrounds. Catherine found herself in deep conversation with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a pioneering researcher working on treatments for childhood cancer. The doctor's work was particularly close to Catherine's heart, as she had been following the progress of several young patients through her patronage of a children's hospital. "Your support has meant everything to our team," Dr. Mitchell told Catherine earnestly. "The funding from your foundation has allowed us to pursue treatments that we never thought possible. We're seeing remission rates that we could only dream of 5 years ago." William joined the conversation, and soon they were discussing the broader implications of the research and how it might be scaled to help children worldwide. These were the moments that reminded them why their work mattered so much. It wasn't just about attending glamorous events, but about using their influence to create real change in people's lives. As dinner was served, William and Catherine took their seats at the head table, positioned where they could see the entire room. The menu had been carefully selected to represent the diversity of the Commonwealth nations, with dishes inspired by traditional recipes from Australia, Canada, India, Jamaica, and other member countries. Catherine particularly enjoyed the conversation with the Jamaican Prime Minister's wife, who shared stories about community gardens that were helping to address food security in rural areas. The entertainment portion of the evening began with a performance by a youth choir from South Africa, their voices soaring through the hall with a song of hope and unity. Catherine felt tears prick at her eyes as she listened to the beautiful harmony, thinking about the journey these young people had taken to be here tonight and the opportunities that lay ahead of them. As the evening progressed toward the moment when William and Catherine would deliver their joint address, both felt a familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility. They had given hundreds of speeches over the years, but tonight felt different. The weight of recent world events, combined with their desire to offer genuine comfort and inspiration, made every word feel crucial. William squeezed Catherine's hand under the table as the evening's host began to introduce them. "We've got this," he whispered, and she nodded, drawing strength from his presence beside her. Together, they had faced many challenges and celebrations, and their partnership had only grown stronger over time. As they rose from their seats and walked toward the stage, the audience erupted in warm applause. The lighting dimmed slightly, creating an intimate atmosphere despite the grandeur of the venue. Catherine could see faces in the crowd, some familiar, some new, but all looking toward them with expectation and hope. William stepped up to the microphone first, his voice clear and confident as he began their carefully prepared remarks. "Distinguished guests, friends, and fellow citizens of our global community, Catherine and I are deeply honored to be with you tonight as we celebrate the bonds that unite us across nations and continents." The speech began exactly as they had rehearsed, focusing on themes of unity, resilience, and shared responsibility. Catherine watched William with pride, admiring his natural ease at the podium and his ability to connect with such a diverse audience. When it came time for her portion, she stepped forward, her own voice steady and warm. "Tonight, we are reminded that in our differences lies our strength," Catherine continued. "Each culture, each tradition, each story represented in this room adds to the rich tapestry of our Commonwealth family. It is in coming together, in listening to one another, and in supporting each other through both celebrations and challenges that we find our truest purpose." The audience was attentive, nodding along with their words. Catherine could see people leaning forward slightly, engaged with the message they were sharing. Everything seemed to be going perfectly according to plan, the evening unfolding exactly as they had envisioned during their months of preparation. But as William returned to the microphone to transition into the next portion of their address, something unexpected happened. A message was quietly delivered to one of the event organizers, who discreetly approached the stage. The change in atmosphere was subtle, but noticeable, a shift in energy that those closest to the front could sense, though the rest of the audience remained unaware. Catherine noticed William's slight pause, the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes that she had learned to recognize over their years together. Something had changed, though she couldn't yet understand what. The carefully orchestrated evening was about to take a turn that none of them had anticipated, setting in motion events that would transform what was meant to be a celebration into something far more profound and emotionally challenging. As William prepared to continue speaking, his hand briefly touched Catherine's arm, a small gesture that spoke of their unity and shared strength, though neither yet knew how much they would need that support in the moments to come. The golden evening that had begun with such promise was about to become a defining moment that would be remembered long after the last guests had departed and the lights of the Royal Albert Hall had dimmed. The message that reached William through his security detail was brief but devastating. Catherine watched as her husband's face changed subtly, the color draining slightly from his cheeks as he absorbed whatever information had just been shared with him. Years of royal training had taught them both to maintain composure in any situation, but Catherine knew William well enough to recognize the signs of distress beneath his carefully controlled exterior. William glanced at Catherine, and, in that moment, she understood that something serious had occurred. The telepathic communication that had developed between them over their years of marriage kicked in, and she gave him an almost imperceptible nod, indicating that whatever needed to be done, they would face it together. Ladies and gentlemen, William's voice remained steady, though those who knew him best could detect a slight strain. I'm afraid we must pause our remarks for a moment. We have just received some news that requires our immediate attention. A murmur rippled through the audience. Catherine moved closer to William, her presence offering silent support as he made the difficult decision to address what had happened. The event organizers had suggested they might handle the situation quietly, perhaps ending the evening early without explanation, but William knew that transparency and honesty had always been the cornerstones of their public service. We have learned, William continued, his voice growing stronger with resolve, that there has been a significant emergency involving one of our Commonwealth partner nations. A devastating earthquake has struck the Pacific island nation of Tuvalu, and early reports suggest widespread damage and potential loss of life. The impact of his words was immediate and profound. Gasps echoed throughout the Royal Albert Hall as guests processed this information. Tuvalu, while small, held special significance for many in attendance, particularly those from Pacific Commonwealth nations who understood the vulnerability of island communities to natural disasters. Catherine stepped forward to the microphone, her own voice clear and compassionate. Our hearts go out immediately to the people of Tuvalu, their families, and everyone affected by this tragedy. While we are here tonight celebrating unity and community, our Commonwealth family is facing one of its greatest challenges. The decision they made next would later be remembered as one of the most defining moments of their royal careers. Rather than ending the evening abruptly or continuing with their planned celebration, William and Catherine chose a third path that demonstrated both their leadership and their genuine commitment to the values they espoused. Tonight was meant to be about coming together in times of both joy and adversity, William said, his voice growing more passionate. We find ourselves now in a moment where our words must become actions, where our commitment to each other must be tested not in comfortable circumstances, but in the face of real crisis. Catherine took the microphone, her heart pounding but her voice steady. We propose to transform this evening from a celebration into something more meaningful, a coordinated response to help our friends in Tuvalu. Every resource, every connection, every bit of influence represented in this room can be mobilized to provide immediate assistance. What happened next was extraordinary. Rather than the polite applause that typically followed royal speeches, the audience erupted into something more genuine, a combination of emotional response and determined action. People began standing, not in formal recognition, but as a spontaneous show of commitment to the cause William and Catherine had just outlined. The Prime Minister of Australia was among the first to respond, standing and announcing that his government would immediately deploy emergency response teams and medical supplies. The Canadian representative followed, pledging both financial aid and specialized rescue equipment. One by one, world leaders, business moguls, and celebrities began making concrete commitments, turning the elegant gala into an impromptu emergency relief coordination center. Catherine found herself overwhelmed by the response, but also energized by it. This was exactly the kind of authentic leadership moment she had always hoped for, where the platform could create immediate, tangible change in the world. She worked the room alongside William, facilitating connections between those who could provide resources and those who could coordinate delivery. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the cancer researcher Catherine had spoken with earlier, approached her with tears in her eyes. "Your Highness, I don't have money to contribute, but I have contacts with medical relief organizations. My research team includes people who specialize in trauma medicine. We can organize medical volunteers." "That would be incredibly valuable," Catherine replied, grasping the doctor's hands. "Every contribution matters, no matter what form it takes." As the evening progressed, something beautiful and unprecedented began to unfold. The formal structure of the gala dissolved into something more organic and powerful. Tables became planning stations. The stage was transformed into a coordination center. Phones rang constantly as attendees reached out to their networks, expanding the circle of support far beyond the walls of the Royal Albert Hall. William found himself in deep conversation with tech entrepreneurs who were offering to provide communication infrastructure to help coordinate relief efforts. Catherine was working with humanitarian organizations to ensure that aid would reach the most vulnerable populations first. The royal couple had effectively become the central hub of an international relief effort that was organizing itself in real time. But as the magnitude of the disaster became clearer through incoming reports, the emotional weight of the situation began to take its toll. Catherine excused herself briefly, stepping into a quiet corridor where she could collect her thoughts. The transformation of their celebratory evening into a crisis response had been the right thing to do, but it was also emotionally exhausting. William found her there a few minutes later, both of them still processing everything that had happened. "Are you all right?" he asked gently, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I keep thinking about the families," Catherine said, her voice thick with emotion. "Parents who might have lost children, children who might have lost their homes. We're here in this beautiful venue, surrounded by luxury, and they're dealing with unimaginable loss." William nodded, understanding her feelings completely. "But look what we've accomplished tonight. In 2 hours, we've organized more concrete aid than most relief efforts manage in 2 weeks. Your idea to transform the evening, it was brilliant." They returned to the main hall to find that the momentum had only grown stronger. A live video connection had been established with Tuvalu's prime minister, who was calling in from a temporary emergency shelter. The sight of his face on the large screen, clearly exhausted but grateful, brought many in the audience to tears. "Your Majesty's distinguished guests," the Prime Minister said, his voice crackling through the connection, "I cannot adequately express what your immediate response means to our people. Knowing that the world has not forgotten us, that help is already on its way. It gives us hope in our darkest hour." Catherine felt her own eyes fill with tears as she listened to his words. This was why they did this work, why they had dedicated their lives to service. It wasn't about the glamour or the ceremonies. It was about moments like this, when they could use their position to make a real difference in people's lives. The evening continued for several more hours, with guests working tirelessly to coordinate aid efforts. By the end of the night, they had organized immediate humanitarian assistance worth millions of dollars, coordinated the deployment of rescue teams from 6 different countries, and established an ongoing support network that would continue working long after the gala had ended. As the last guests began to leave, many stopped to thank William and Catherine personally. There was something different in these interactions compared to the typical formal farewells at royal events. These felt more genuine, more connected to real emotion and shared purpose. "Tonight changed everything," whispered Lady Margaret Thornton, a longtime supporter of royal charities. "I've been to hundreds of these events over the years, but I've never seen anything like this. You turned a party into something that will actually save lives." When William and Catherine finally left the Royal Albert Hall in the early hours of the morning, they were exhausted but also deeply moved by what they had experienced. Their carefully planned evening had been completely transformed, but in becoming something they never expected, it had also become more meaningful than anything they could have originally imagined. The drive back to Kensington Palace was quiet, both of them lost in thought about the evening's events. Catherine still wore her emerald gown, though it was now slightly wrinkled from hours of animated conversation and coordination work. William had long since removed his bow tie, his formal shirt unbuttoned at the collar. "The children will want to know everything," Catherine said softly as they approached their home. "They will," William agreed. "And I think this is exactly the kind of lesson we want them to learn, that with privilege comes responsibility, and that responsibility means acting when action is needed, even when it's difficult or unexpected." As they entered their private residence, both William and Catherine knew that this night would be remembered as a turning point, not just in their own lives, but in how the royal family engaged with global crises. They had demonstrated that leadership meant more than ceremony and tradition. It meant being willing to adapt, to respond, and to put the needs of others ahead of their own comfort and plans. The tears that would come later, that would touch hearts around the world, had not yet fallen. But the foundation for those emotional moments had been laid in these hours of crisis response, in the genuine human connections they had facilitated, and in their own growing understanding of what their roles truly meant in an interconnected world facing unprecedented challenges. 3 days after the transformed gala, William and Catherine found themselves on an emergency flight to the Pacific, heading directly to the disaster zone in Tuvalu. The decision to make this journey had not been easy. Their security team had serious concerns about the infrastructure damage and ongoing safety risks. However, both William and Catherine felt that their presence was needed, not for media purposes, but to continue the work they had started at the Royal Albert Hall. The flight was long and sobering. Intelligence briefings during the journey revealed the true scope of the devastation. The earthquake, measuring 8.2 on the Richter scale, had been followed by a devastating tsunami that had swept across several of the low-lying atolls that made up the nation. Early estimates suggested that nearly a quarter of the population had been displaced, with entire communities having lost everything they owned. Catherine stared out the airplane window at the vast expanse of Pacific Ocean, thinking about the families they would soon meet. She had packed practical clothes for this trip: sturdy boots, simple dresses that could be easily cleaned, and a small bag of supplies that included basic medical items and comfort objects for children. This was not a ceremonial visit, and every choice had been made with function over form in mind. William was reviewing detailed maps and damage assessments with their security team, but Catherine could see the weight of responsibility in his posture. Since inheriting his father's dedication to environmental causes, William had become increasingly concerned about the impact of climate change on vulnerable island nations. The devastation they were flying toward represented his worst fears made manifest. "The local authorities have requested that we focus our visit on 3 main areas," William explained to Catherine as they prepared for landing. "The main evacuation center where most families are currently housed, the port facility where aid is being distributed, and a coastal community that was particularly hard hit but where rescue efforts have been successful. Their plane landed on a runway that showed visible signs of damage, cracked concrete hastily patched, debris cleared to the sides, and emergency lighting systems replacing the normal airport infrastructure. As they descended the aircraft steps, the humid tropical air hit them immediately, but so did the acrid smell of smoke and the sound of ongoing rescue operations. The local officials who met them were clearly exhausted, running on adrenaline and determination rather than adequate rest. Prime Minister Talik, whom they had spoken with via video connection during the gala, greeted them with a mixture of gratitude and barely contained emotion. Your Majesties, that you have come so quickly, that you are here with us in this difficult time. It means more than I can express, he said, his voice slightly hoarse from days of coordinating emergency responses. Their first stop was the primary evacuation center, housed in what had been a school, but was now serving as temporary shelter for nearly 2,000 people. As their vehicle approached the building, Catherine could see families gathered outside, children playing with makeshift toys while adults worked to organize sleeping arrangements and distribute food supplies. The scene inside the evacuation center was both heartbreaking and inspiring. Families had created small private spaces using blankets and donated supplies, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy and dignity despite having lost their homes. Catherine was immediately drawn to a corner where several mothers were caring for infants and toddlers, clearly struggling with the challenges of providing proper care in such difficult conditions. "Please, don't let us interrupt what you're doing," Catherine said gently as she approached the group. "I'm here to listen and to understand how we can best help." What followed was one of the most emotionally challenging conversations of Catherine's life. Maria Santos, a young mother holding her 6-month-old daughter, began to describe the moment when the tsunami warnings had sounded. "I grabbed my baby and ran," Maria said, her voice steady but her hands shaking slightly as she spoke. "My husband was at work at the port. I didn't know if he was safe. I just ran with her, and when I looked back, our house was gone. Everything we had worked for, everything we had built together, just gone." Catherine listened intently, her heart breaking for this woman who was clearly trying to stay strong for her child. "And your husband?" she asked gently. Maria's composure finally cracked. "He's safe, thank God. But he's been working nonstop on the rescue efforts. I've barely seen him since it happened. My baby keeps asking for daddy, but I don't know when he'll be able to come back to us." Without thinking about protocol or propriety, Catherine reached out and gently touched Maria's arm. "Would it help if I held her for a moment, so you can rest your arms?" The simple gesture opened floodgates of emotion, not just for Maria, but for several other mothers who had been holding their emotions in check since the disaster struck. As Catherine cradled the baby girl, who had fallen asleep despite the chaos around them, Maria finally allowed herself to cry, deep, wrenching sobs of fear, exhaustion, and grief. William, who had been speaking with community leaders about infrastructure needs, noticed the emotional scene developing and quietly approached. He knelt down beside Catherine and began speaking softly with the other children in the group, asking about their favorite games and foods, trying to bring moments of lightness into their difficult circumstances. 8-year-old Tomasi shyly approached William and tugged on his sleeve. "Are you really a prince?" the boy asked in careful English. William smiled and sat down properly on the floor, bringing himself to the child's eye level. "I am, but right now I'm just here as a friend. What's your favorite thing to do when you're not at school?" "I like to fish with my grandfather," Tomasi replied, his eyes lighting up for the first time. "But our boat is broken now. The big water took it away." The conversation that followed was simple but profound. Tomasi described his life before the disaster, helping his grandfather mend nets, learning to read the weather patterns, dreaming of becoming a master fisherman himself. William listened with complete attention, asking thoughtful questions and showing genuine interest in the boy's experiences and aspirations. "My grandfather says the fish will come back," Tomasi continued. "He says after big storms, sometimes the fishing is even better than before. Do you think that's true?" William considered the question carefully before answering. I think your grandfather is very wise. Sometimes after difficult things happen, we discover strength we didn't know we had. And sometimes we find ways to rebuild that are even better than what we had before. Catherine, still holding Maria's baby, watched this interaction with growing emotion. This was William at his absolute best. Not the future king delivering prepared remarks, but a father and human being connecting authentically with a child who needed hope and comfort. Their visit continued throughout the day, with stops at medical treatment areas where volunteer doctors and nurses were working around the clock, and at distribution centers where aid supplies were being organized and distributed. At each location, William and Catherine spent time with both the disaster victims. Catherine found herself standing with Mir Retinabwabwa, an elderly grandmother who had just been reunited with her granddaughter after being separated during the evacuation. Mir had spent 2 days not knowing whether her granddaughter was safe, while 8-year-old Salot had been asking everyone at the evacuation center if they had seen her grandmother. "I thought I had lost her," Mir said, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she held Salot close. "She's all I have left in this world. When they told me she was safe, when they brought her to me, I thought my heart might stop from relief." Catherine watched this reunion with growing emotion, thinking of her own children back home and how she would feel in a similar situation. The love between grandmother and granddaughter was so pure, so powerful, that it seemed to illuminate something essential about human resilience and the bonds that sustain us through the most difficult times. As the day progressed, and they witnessed more reunions, more stories of loss and survival, more examples of communities coming together to support each other, Catherine felt herself becoming overwhelmed by the intensity of human emotion surrounding them. This was not the sanitized version of royal charity work that she was accustomed to. This was raw, unfiltered human experience at its most vulnerable and most powerful. William, too, was deeply affected by what they were witnessing. As someone who had experienced profound loss himself with his mother's death, he found himself particularly moved by the children who had been separated from their parents and the elderly residents who had lost homes they had lived in for decades. As evening approached, and they prepared to return to their temporary accommodation, both William and Catherine were emotionally drained, but also profoundly changed by what they had experienced. The helicopter flight back to their base gave them their first quiet moment to process the day's events. "I can't stop thinking about Maria and her baby," Catherine said, looking out at the damaged landscape passing below them. About Tomasi talking about fishing with his grandfather. About Mir and Salot finding each other again. William nodded, understanding completely. "It makes everything else seem so trivial, doesn't it? All the ceremony, all the protocol, none of it matters compared to what these families are going through." They flew in contemplative silence for several more minutes before Catherine spoke again. "I think we need to do more than just visit and coordinate aid. I think we need to find a way to really change how we approach this kind of work." What neither of them realized was that their day in Tuvalu had already begun to change them in ways that would soon become apparent to the world. The emotional walls that royal training had taught them to maintain were beginning to crumble in the face of such genuine human need and connection. The tears that would soon flow, the words that would break hearts around the globe, were building within them as they witnessed the full spectrum of human resilience and vulnerability. The most profound moment was yet to come, but the foundation had been laid through a day of authentic human connection that had stripped away pretense and revealed the essential truth of what their service could really mean. The final day of William and Catherine's visit to Tuvalu began with an early morning walk through what had once been the nation's most prosperous fishing village. The devastation was complete. Homes reduced to scattered debris, boats tossed inland like toys, and the carefully tended gardens that had sustained families for generations now buried under sand and salt water. Catherine walked silently beside William, both of them absorbing the magnitude of loss that surrounded them. Their security detail maintained a respectful distance, understanding that this moment required space for private reflection. The morning air was still and heavy, broken only by the sound of waves and the distant work of cleanup crews. They had requested this time to walk alone through the destroyed community before their final official engagement, a press conference where they would address the international media about the relief efforts and the ongoing needs of the Tuvaluan people. Both knew that their words today would be carefully washed around the world, but neither had yet found the language to adequately capture what they had witnessed over the past 3 days. As they reached what had been the village center, they encountered Pita Solomona, an elderly fisherman who had returned to search through the remains of his family's compound. He was methodically sorting through debris, occasionally stopping to examine a fragment that might have belonged to his previous life. "Sir, we meet again," William said gently, recognizing the man they had spoken with briefly the day before. "Are you finding anything you can save?" Pita looked up with tired eyes but managed a slight smile. "Your Highness, I found this," he said, holding up a small, waterlogged wooden carving. "My father made this for my mother when they were young. Somehow it survived." He handed the carving to Catherine, who examined it carefully. Despite the water damage, she could make out the delicate features of a traditional Tuvaluan design, a turtle surrounded by waves, symbolizing endurance and the connection between land and sea. "It's beautiful," Catherine said softly. "Your father was very skilled. He taught me everything I know about reading the ocean, about respecting the water." Pita continued, his voice growing thick with emotion. He said, "The sea gives and takes, but it always teaches." I never understood that lesson until now. William found himself deeply moved by the man's dignity in the face of such loss. "Will you rebuild here?" he asked. Pita nodded slowly. "Where else would I go? This is my home, the home of my ancestors. The water took our houses, but it cannot take our connection to this place. We will rebuild, and we will remember what we learned." As they continued their walk, Catherine found herself thinking about resilience and what truly meant. She had used the word countless times in speeches and public appearances, but witnessing it in action was entirely different. These people weren't being resilient because someone had told them to be strong. They were continuing because giving up simply wasn't an option, because their love for their community and their way of life was stronger than the forces that had tried to destroy it. Their walk brought them to a temporary memorial that had been erected for the victims of the disaster. Flowers, personal items, and photographs had been placed around a simple wooden cross, creating a sacred space where community members could come to grieve and remember. William and Catherine stood quietly before the memorial, each lost in their own thoughts about loss, memory, and the preciousness of life. It was here, in this moment of quiet reflection, that Catherine began to understand what she needed to say to the world. The words weren't about policy or coordination or even about the immediate relief efforts. They needed to be about the fundamental human truth of what she had witnessed, the capacity for love to endure in the face of unimaginable loss, and the responsibility that came with witnessing such courage. The press conference was scheduled to take place at the rebuilt community center, one of the first structures to be restored after the disaster. International journalists had gathered from around the world, their cameras and recording equipment creating a stark contrast to the simple, practical setting of the island community. As William and Catherine took their positions behind the modest podium, both could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another royal press conference. It was an opportunity to ensure that the world understood what was at stake, not just for Tuvalu, but for vulnerable communities everywhere that were facing the increasing threat of climate-related disasters. William began with the practical updates that the international community needed to hear. He outlined the success of the relief efforts, the ongoing needs for reconstruction support, and the plan for building more resilient infrastructure. His words were clear and informative, but those who knew him well could detect an underlying emotion that was barely contained beneath his composed exterior. The response from the international community has been remarkable, William said. In the space of 1 week, we have seen what is possible when the world comes together with genuine commitment to helping those in need. But this crisis has also revealed something much deeper about human nature and about our responsibilities to each other. Catherine stepped forward to the microphone, and immediately, those present could sense that something significant was about to happen. Her usually steady hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the microphone, and her voice, when she began to speak, carried a weight of emotion that was unmistakable. 3 days ago, I held a baby whose mother had lost everything except the clothes she was wearing. Catherine began, her voice steady but thick with feeling. I spoke with children who asked me if their toys would grow back like flowers after the storm. I met grandparents who had lived through decades of hardship, but never experienced anything like the terror of not knowing if their families had survived. She paused, visibly collecting herself before continuing. As members of the royal family, we are trained to maintain composure, to provide stability and reassurance in times of crisis. But standing here today, having looked into the eyes of people who have lost everything and yet continue to show such incredible strength and grace, I find that composure feels almost insulting to the magnitude of what I have witnessed. The journalists in attendance began to lean forward, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented. Catherine's departure from the typical formal language of royal addresses was striking, but it was the emotion in her voice that was truly capturing attention. I have 3 children at home, Catherine continued, and now her voice began to break slightly. They're safe, they're fed, they sleep in comfortable beds, and wake up surrounded by everything they need. But every child I have met here loves their family just as fiercely as my children love theirs. Every parent here would do anything to protect their child, just as I would do anything to protect mine. William moved slightly closer to Catherine, not to take over, but to offer his support as she continued with what was clearly one of the most difficult speeches of her life. The question that haunts me, Catherine said, her eyes filling with tears that she no longer tried to hide, is why geography should determine whether a child grows up safe and secure or whether they face the constant threat of losing everything they hold dear. Why should the accident of birth mean that some families live in luxury while others live in constant vulnerability to forces beyond their control? The tears that had been building since her first day in Tuvalu began to flow freely now, but Catherine continued speaking, her voice growing stronger even as her emotion became more visible. I cannot stand before you today and pretend that this is just another disaster that will be forgotten when the news cycle moves on. I cannot return to my privileged life and go back to cutting ribbons and attending garden parties as if I have not seen what I have seen, as if I do not know what I now know. William stepped up to the microphone beside his wife, his own eyes visibly moist. What Catherine is expressing, he said, his voice rough with emotion, is something that I believe many people feel but struggle to articulate. The randomness of suffering, the arbitrariness of safety, and our collective responsibility to address these fundamental inequalities. He paused, looking out at the assembled media, and then at the local community members who had gathered to listen. My mother spent her life trying to break down the barriers between privilege and need, between the comfortable and the suffering. She understood that true leadership meant being willing to have your heart broken by the reality of other people's pain. The reference to Princess Diana brought a fresh wave of emotion to both William and Catherine. They had often spoken privately about how to honor her legacy, but never before had they connected so directly to her approach of authentic emotional engagement with the world's problems. Catherine took the microphone again, her tears now flowing freely, but her voice clear and determined. We are announcing today the establishment of a new foundation dedicated specifically to climate resilience for small island nations. But more than that, we are committing to a different way of engaging with these issues, one that prioritizes long-term relationship building over short-term media attention, one that centers the voices and leadership of affected communities rather than the convenience of international donors. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand in a gesture that was captured by dozens of cameras and would later be seen around the world. I'm crying not because I pity the people of Tuvalu, but because their strength and dignity in the face of such loss has shown me what real courage looks like. I am crying because I am ashamed of how long it took me to truly understand the weight of my own privilege. And I am crying because I love my children so much that I cannot bear the thought of them inheriting a world where such preventable suffering continues. William placed his hand gently on Catherine's shoulder as she composed herself to continue. The gesture was tender and supportive, but also showed his own emotional state. His eyes were red, and his usual composed demeanor had given way to visible vulnerability. The people of Tuvalu have taught us that resilience is not about enduring suffering silently, William said. It is about demanding that the world do better, that we all take responsibility for each other's well-being. They have shown us that hope is not passive optimism, but active determination to create change. The press conference concluded with a series of questions from journalists, but the focus had shifted from policy details to the unprecedented emotional honesty that William and Catherine had displayed. Videos of Catherine's tearful speech began spreading on social media within minutes, with millions of people around the world responding to the raw authenticity of her words. Later that evening, as they prepared to depart Tuvalu, William and Catherine received an unexpected visit from a group of local children who had made them a farewell gift, a hand-woven mat created from materials they had found in the debris of their homes. 8-year-old Tomasi, the boy who had spoken with William about fishing, presented the gift with shy pride. "This is for your children," Tomasi said carefully. "So they know about us, and so they remember that the ocean connects all of us." Catherine knelt down to receive the gift, fresh tears in her eyes as she understood the profound generosity of children who had lost almost everything but still wanted to give something beautiful to her family. "We will treasure this always," she told him, "and we will make sure our children know the story of how brave and kind the children of Tuvalu are." As their plane lifted off from the island, both William and Catherine knew that they were returning home fundamentally changed. The tears they had shed, the words they had spoken, the commitments they had made, all of it represented a departure from the traditional royal approach to public service and toward something more honest, more vulnerable, and ultimately more powerful. The video footage of their emotional press conference would be viewed by hundreds of millions of people around the world, but more importantly, it would mark the beginning of a new chapter in how they understood their roles and responsibilities. They had discovered that their greatest strength lay not in maintaining perfect composure, but in allowing their hearts to be broken open by the reality of human suffering and then using that brokenness as a source of authentic action and connection. Their royal entrance to the world of climate activism had indeed ended in tears, but those tears would prove to be the beginning of some of the most meaningful work of their lives.